Awesome. Let me full screen that. All right. I did do something on Instagram. Hey, peace, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in for another episode of Disrupted Chaos. I'm so happy to have my guest tonight. We hadn't seen each other in a while, but he definitely was. I would consider him a mentor and teacher, and listening to him and reading him has always given me an international world perspective, since so much of even my academic work is based around race in the United States. So, VIJAY Prashad, I'm so happy to have you on. And then we got this little hack we do where I go on my phone and Instagram live. So then we're on all the platforms.
Okay, wow. Well, it's great to see you. I mean, I really can't remember when was the last time. It was a long time ago. I mean, the
Yeah.
names that come to my mind with you are Bakari Kitwana, Joan Morgan, Mark Anthony Neal, inclusive of M1, and I've forgotten the guy's name in Chicago where I think you had a fight with him. I don't remember. There was some sexist lyrics and you jumped on this guy.
Oh,
And
Rhyme Fest. He was
yes,
a hip. He was a
exactly.
hip hop. Oh yeah. I remember. That's so weird because he also had like a motorcycle. I think that's what I remember. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, but I mean, you didn't cut him any slack, and I watched you just say, "Look, this is just unacceptable." It's not. You can't hide behind the word art and do whatever the hell you want. It's like Donald Trump hiding behind the word president and doing whatever he wants. If you can't do that, I mean, you still have to be a decent human being. And
Yeah.
I very much remember that day, and remember, like, that's the lesson, isn't it? You can't hide behind something and be a jerk. I mean, you have to be a decent human being, whatever you do. I mean, whatever your job is, if you're in hip hop, if you're the president, whatever your job is, you have to be a decent human being. That's what we
Yeah.
aspire to at any rate. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, family, now that Instagram's on, again, welcome to another episode of Disrupted Chaos. This show, as you all know, is sponsored by Cooperation Jackson, airs Wednesdays at 7. And my guest tonight is VIJAY Prashad, who's just an incredible human being. I've known him for a long time, a self declared Marxist, revolutionary writer, an amazing writer, who is the co-founder of the Intercontinental Center.
Tricontinental is good. Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm just super happy to have you on because every day, like, my daughter was here yesterday and she was like, why is he only been in office for 6 weeks and it feels like 10 years? I think so many people are feeling that, and rightfully so. Well, let me just make an update on something real quick, y'all. So I've been covering the case of Robert Brooks, as you all know, the brother that was beaten to death in one of the correctional facilities up here in upstate New York. I've had his lawyer on, Elizabeth Massou, and one day I'll have the family on, but I'm following it very closely because for new people, I live in Albany, New York, the capital. Well, 3 days ago, 15 COs were let go from another facility where another Black man, 22 years old, Messiah Untwai, was beaten to death. And at the same time, the COs in New York are doing a wildcat strike. Wildcat strike basically means your union did not approve it. But because they did, the National Guard is now in these prisons, and they're using solitary confinement, which in New York, there was so many reforms to that. And a National Guard in a prison in New York is just never a good thing. And if you want to know why, know everything about Attica and the uprising of Attica. And a couple of days on Democracy Now!, this younger brother was on, and he says it's the long struggle of Attica, because everywhere people in the state, everywhere incarcerated, the amount of abuse and violence, and also what gall does it take to know the place where the first brother was beaten to death, the other facility is 20 minutes from that one, right? So I tell people think New York State is New York City. No, no. You come up to Albany all the way to the Canadian border, you will be seeing Trump. You will be seeing a group called the Proud Boys marching in the Saratoga parade.
Mm,
And so many of the prisons, y'all, without them, those people lose their jobs, because with deindustrialization and the end of manufacturing, what you have in upstate New York, right? Farms, but now prisons are the number one employer and economic generator for those places. So these folks fight a lot, white world folks, to keep prisons. I will say that Kathy Hochul has been doing some good thing. There's been 7 shut down, but now here we are at this other moment. So y'all, I'm going to keep you updated on that. So, okay, VJ, did you watch the presidential address?
I do what most people do nowadays is I watch clips of things. And so, of course, I watched the Al Green moment. I didn't really know anything about him, to be very honest with you. And
Mm.
I watched that entire section. I watched that a couple of times. The speech was the speech. Trump is Trump. That section was interesting, not for what Al Green did, which is super brave to just stand up there and refuse to move, but it's how how the Democrats just didn't do anything. Nobody stood up with him. It seemed to me, at least, or came and surrounded him when the sergeant at arms. Nobody defended him. But let that be. The Democratic Party is pretty much a party asleep. But the Republican Party, to see the glee and joy with which they kept making these hand gestures, get him out, this, that, and the other. It's an interesting country. I mean, it takes a very long time to wash, the residue of racism out of a country. It takes a very long time. And there it was, it's right there. These mainly white men standing up gleefully saying, just get him out of here.
Yeah, it almost
There was,
it reminded me, like in the 1800s, as this government were being formed, like you could be a Klansman and be up in the government structure, and it's just who they are, a 3.0, and they are not afraid, so they don't have to hide anything. I watched the whole thing. I guess I like beating myself because, and obviously I follow electoral politics. Not that I'll ever run again, but I continue to stay more angry at the Democratic Party. I don't think any of them, they should all have walked out. Some of them could have been brave. Some of the older ones, especially African American Latinos, because the reason they are even congressional people, that kind of whole class of those of from the civil rights movement and other social justice movements, a little bit Nydia Velasquez, like y'all should have had a sit-in. You should have. I think first, it's the right thing to do. Okay. Might be performative, but I think it would have been critically important for people to see some pushback, and then Al Green, the only one, and then you're holding everybody else holding paddles, the squad lies. I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is not, it's not normal. Like, and I was listening to Ralph Nader today, where he said this is now preparation for full state surveillance. So VJ, as someone that really does study the world and has seen how other countries do that. But of course, we know Russia does that. And I guess Elon Musk and, I don't even, is he the president? Isn't Elon Musk and Putin the president and vice president? But you've seen this, and you've seen the consequences when they do come after people as a group or individually. What's the lesson we should be learning about that?
The first thing is I saw that there was somebody, couldn't recognize her, holding a very small sign that said something like, "This is not normal." Okay, that was the sign. And the first thought that came to me is, well, what's normal for you? Was normal during the Biden years, when the United States continued to arm Israel, as it conducted what, the International Court of Justice called basically a genocide. Was that normal? I mean, the United States hasn't been normal for a very long time. And, you and I can discuss, well, when does that very long time start? Does it begin when the first ships arrived from Africa bringing humans as chattel? Is that normal? Was that normal? Was a constitution written 3/5 of a human? Is that normal? Was Jim Crow normal? I mean, when's normal? Because when you say this is not normal, that's a little bit like make America great again. It's the same sort of thing. What's normal? I mean, normal is the future. You haven't been there yet. State surveillance, that's already there. Police violence, that's already there. You just mentioned stories of people being beaten to death in prisons, not in Alabama, not in Oklahoma, but in New York. Yeah, in New York. Those were stories. That's not normal either. And where's the governor of New York from? Is the governor of New York a Trumpian? No. What's normal? I mean, normal hasn't been there for a very long time. And in many parts of the world, I have to say, I mean, I live in Chile, down at the other end of the Americas. People look at the United States with horror and wonder, what is happening there? And it's not just the Trump thing that creates the horror, to be very, very blunt and honest. It's the whole culture. Something seems to be going wrong with the totality of the culture of the United States. This idea that keeps going in waves, punctually returns, of white supremacy, just not wanting to give up. We're just going to cancel diversity, equality, integration, just cancel it. I mean, but again, how is that new? Remember an earlier time in Arizona, we're just going to ban books that are multicultural. The attack on multiculturalism, that attack happened in the 1980s, during the time of Ronald Reagan. It keeps coming back. It's white supremacy refusing to give up. It's the old structures of power, wretched structures. However sclerotic and arthritic white supremacy is, it's holding on to something. They don't want to let go. It may be arthritic, but it's not going to let go. And so I watch these things, and Rosa, to be perfectly honest with you, I watch these things and I think there's something deep. The taproot of racism so deep, the taproot of class power so deep. You can tug at it a little bit, but you're not getting it. It's not being pulled out. The civil rights movement basically loosened the carrot of white supremacy. It just loosened it. It didn't get it out. All those fights, that happened in the 1980s, 90s, Black Lives Matter, it just kind of loosens it. But then something rigid happens. BLM was the biggest mass protest movement in US history. Bigger than the civil rights movement, bigger than the movements against the war in Vietnam. There were millions of people on the street just before the pandemic. Loosened white supremacy, but it didn't wrench it out. It's still there. It keeps coming back. Trump is not an unusual character. I'm actually uncomfortable how people are demonizing him as if he's some freak of nature. Trump is basically the waves of white supremacy that come and go. Whether it's the Reaganism of the 1980s, which was as hideous before that Nixon, an out and out racist, right? The waves of white supremacy that come and go. That's how I see it. I see there's a debate that needs to be had. And I don't know where, if I'm honest with you, I don't know where that debate should be had. I mean, should it be had like us talking, but who's listening to us? Who are the people listening to us? Do you want to go on AM talk radio and discuss things with Michael Savage? No, it's bad for your health. It's bad for your sense of balance and equanimity and whatnot. I don't even want to go on like, Democracy Now! Or MSNBC, because I fear that the things I would say would just exhaust them and they would be like, this guy's a nut. I don't need that. So where does this conversation take place? I really don't have any clue.
No, and I'm glad historically, and as a historian, 100% agree with you. The ways, I really think the only difference now is the social media element. You don't have to wait for an investigative journalist for 6 months to know what's happening. It's just happening. And then, of course, unfortunately, so many young folks in this country have and other people, no idea. They know another world is out there. They just have no want or interest to even learn, but then we look obviously at college students and the new iteration of young people who are taking it probably to the hardest, most vengeful country to defend, Gaza and Palestine, and now the Palestinian people. And now some of my friends were like, wait, what happened to the ceasefire? I'm like, why would you believe that? Like, and you know what I'm saying? Like, what do you think? They were really going to stop? No. They need a break, a couple things, and then they're like holding up the aid, and we're watching a genocide happening at this moment. But when we talk about about surveillance, attack on journalists, can you put that also in in an international perspective?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I mean, I have to say that this is a personal story as well, because in 2023, the New York Times wrote a terrible article which basically accused me of being an agent of the Chinese government. And anybody who is critical of the United States has to be a paid agent of the Russians or the Chinese or somebody. You can't have half a brain and be critical of the US, without being somebody's stooge. I mean, this is the attitude of the liberal media. Just, target people and say that they are out of bounds. Yeah. People who are pro-Palestinian are being accused of, again, being agents of X and Y and Hamas and this and that. I mean, why can't I just be pro-Palestinian? I mean, why can't I just be against the genocide? I don't need to be paid by Hamas or anybody. I just have my own ideas. Why not? I study things, I read them. But this targeting of people, it goes deep. It's basically bipartisan. Last year, Marco Rubio, when he was a senator, wrote a letter to the Justice Department asking that I and others be investigated for, again, being stooges of the Chinese government. This was last year, before he became the Secretary of State. He named us, and said that these people are dangerous because they're spreading disinformation. What disinformation, Marco? What disinformation? I wrote a book last year with Noam Chomsky called On Cuba. The book is based almost entirely on US government documents, on documents of the US government, things that they said. Chomsky and I basically analyzed the documents, against them, but we analyzed their documents. What is information? US government document says that we have to overthrow the Cuban Revolution because we cannot allow Castro to defy the United States and therefore spread a contagion of defiance across Latin America. That's basically a quote from a US government document. That's what the US government is saying, not me. I just published it. And Marco Rubio says, well, you're spreading disinformation. What disinformation? These are the people that want to go abroad and overthrow governments. Again, I'm sitting and talking to you about maybe 2 miles away from the place where the United States government authorized a coup d'etat against the legitimate democratic president of Chile, Salvador Allende, and he was killed 2 miles away in the Moneda, the presidential palace. The documents for that are all in the US government archives, now published by the New Press in a book edited by Peter Kornblum, where Nixon tells Kissinger, we got to make the economy scream in Chile. Nixon tells Kissinger, we can't tolerate this guy Allende. We got to do something about him. Kissinger tells Nixon, we're in touch with the military. I mean, they greenlight the coup. That's US government material. But if you talk about it, well, then you're a purveyor of disinformation. You're paid by the Chinese government. This way of, even Trump calling journalists enemies of the people, in Biden's a press office, Sam Husseini, our friend,
Yeah.
stood up to ask a question, and he was forcibly removed. He was dragged out of the White House press room, and that was a Democratic administration. All Sam Husseini was trying to ask was, look, here's what you said on X day, Miller, and this is what now you're claiming. There's a discrepancy. Please confirm the discrepancy. Do you not believe there's a genocide, etc.? It's journalism. But no, for these people in power, it's disinformation. They don't go after journalists any longer, Rosa, by saying we're going to arrest you because you're a journalist. They go after journalists by saying, well, you fudged your taxes or you're paid by XYZ. They go after not the message, but the messenger. And they make people's lives hell. I mean, they really make people's lives hell. And that's happening in the United States. My colleagues in India, very similar, NewsClick. My colleague Probir Purkayastha, we started this platform together in 2009. He spent almost a year in prison. What was the charge? Probir Purkayastha was being paid by the Chinese to run a perfectly good and decent video and text website that published good, high quality journalism called NewsClick, now effectively shut down by the Indian government. Why? Because they accused the editor of something he didn't do. I mean, how do I prove something I didn't do? You accuse me of being an agent of the Chinese government. I'm not an agent of the Chinese government, but how do I prove I'm not? I can't show you a piece of paper, an affidavit that said, well, this is from the government of China saying he's actually not our agent. I mean, it's a ridiculous situation, but that is the way they shut down dissent, journalism. That's how they shut down protesters, saying pro-Palestinian protesters, oh, you're pro-Hamas, or what Nancy Pelosi said, these guys are all paid by the Russians. I mean, that's disrespectful to the essence of democracy, in my opinion.
Yeah, and obviously he was always going to say this, but in the news yesterday, there was an article about how he's beginning to tell universities, right, private, anyone that gets federal funding, that they'll have to expel students if the students even have one protest. So not only a chilling effect, I think what's happened, I think what's not happening is that even now, there is not, no one wants to talk about class, right? Like, yes, some of you are going to be all right just by the nature of having money, right? I thought we were getting better at those conversations, but it now seems like that's the last thing. And I'm not just talking about the people against that. I'm talking about like organizers and people in meetings. I'm like, why are we not addressing the issue of class? How are we not addressing that at this moment? All these federal workers who have been fired, I think about it like a domino. They're fired, so the little bodega or the little store where you get your newspaper, you eat lunch there, those are going to be impacted. More people are going to lose their jobs. And we know this as a capitalist structure. We should know. I do think that maybe some people in our audience might not fully understand Marxism and socialism, but if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that then means the type of organizing you have to do, you can't just organize on a college campus. You're going to have to be in your own community, organizing locally, because we don't have a national movement. And that's not a bad thing. But if we're going to be still afraid to talk about the devastating effects of capitalism and imperialism, then we need to know,
I mean, again, I'm really sorry to keep pulling the lens back and sort of taking you, let's go back. But I mean, you go back to, you live in Albany. In a way, Albany is like the edge of the Rust Belt, right? That starts somewhere in southern part of Chicago and runs all the way across, northern Indiana, Ohio, all the way across to where you are. I mean, Columbus, Ohio, Niagara Falls, just south
Yeah.
of Niagara Falls, Buffalo, all the way to Albany. That's a kind of old-fashioned Rust Belt. You've got all these old towns, the Kodak factory closes, these northern New York or central New York towns just get devastated. Yeah. They outsource things to some of it to Asia, some of it to Mexico, and you can actually keep going from Albany to North Adams, Massachusetts, where the Sprague factory closes, becomes Mass Mocha, moves to Mexico, where they made capacitors, which are essential for early computers. All of that deindustrialization happens. And then capital is smart. I mean, that's the interesting thing. Capital was smart. It moved up the value chain in the US, hired people into effectively service jobs. But rather than allow the service sector to be unionized, like the old blue collar jobs, right? The Kodak, the auto factories and so on, which were all unionized, where people got, not good wages, but decent wages. They had union protection and so on. When the service sector jobs appeared in the US after the 1980s, those jobs were all precarious. People got short-term contracts. They were many of them hired through temp agencies, so they weren't actually hired by the firm, but they were subcontracted from a temp agency. That itself was devastating, and you had the emergence of precarious employment. Employment that was so precarious that some of it had to be imported from out of the country, some on legal, some on illegal basis. Yeah, people would come to work on H-2 visas to pick strawberries. Those were workers who came with papers. There were others who came without papers to fulfill a part of the labor market. So the capital was quite happy to have people with or without papers coming from across the borders to do the most difficult work, cleaning offices, things like that. And then you had these office workers who formerly, some of them blue collar workers, thinking that they're entering the white collar middle class, except they were not salaried anymore. They were on temp contracts. They worked in call centers. The capital invented a term called business process outsourcing, BPOs, where you sat in a giant warehouse somewhere in the Midwest and typed in, you did data entry for a corporation, you did backroom work for some sort of healthcare provider and so on. You did their paperwork. And then when the internet improved, they outsourced all of that to places like India, to Ireland, where people spoke English, and could do some of this backroom stuff. So even those jobs collapsed, and many of those people were too old to find new jobs. They went into early retirement. They were distressed. Their children who went to college, through being that generation of college, couldn't find jobs. They're all precarious workers. They're serving as baristas. They're working here, there, and everywhere. There's a real collapse of the U.S. working class and the middle class into something just called the basic blob of the precariat. The precarious proletariat. It's a big blob of jobs. It includes Uber drivers. It includes people who work in baristas. It includes the bodega workers. But it also includes the people who come and pick strawberries in the summer on H-2 visas. They are all precarious workers. They don't have long contracts. They can get fired at will. You don't need to be in a right to work state anymore, because even if you are in a unionizing state, you can't make a union if you're on a precarious contract. There is no unionization. You have wildcat attempts at unionization, right? The Amazon, one place in New York, started a union, right?
Yes,
And people got so excited, but it's very hard to make a union in an Amazon place because they're all on precarious contracts. Starbucks workers desperate to unionize, they get fired. Why? Because you don't have a contract. There are places, that this better than I. There are places like Starbucks that hire you per day. In fact, even if you have a long-term job relationship there, your formal contract is daily. In a way, when you come into work that day, you hope that you have work. You're like those Mexican men in Florida or the men from the Caribbean in Florida that stand at the edge of a small highway when a pickup truck comes and they are day laborers. They're put in in the back of the truck and taken to work construction for the day. That was the, precarious contract of an earlier period. You think, oh, well, those are migrants, in running shoes who are waiting by the side of the freeway to be picked up to work construction for a day. Well, guess what, guys? Everybody has been Uberized. Everybody has been Uberized. You got a whole society of people who are Uberized workers. The form of work is not unionized, but Uberized. And nobody is really looking at that. The unions have thrown their hands up in the air almost, saying we don't know how to organize these kind of workers, and capital is just reaping the profits of this.
And what's happening too, right? Automation. There's going to come a time where you are not going to have but maybe 2 live people at Walmart, in the airports. I mean, traveling a lot. The last couple of years, I began to see, I'm sure you see these things in the airport where you just walk in, they scan your number, you pick out, and the only person there is someone who's just making sure that everything worked. And I was so like, wait a minute, don't you need to use my card or anything? She was like, no. And then obviously we've seen where retail stores are going to go more full blown on automation. And I'm wondering though, last Friday on the 28th, there was a call for economic boycott. And I'm of the belief that these things don't work. Like, you can't boycott for a day, and you certainly can't say 2 weeks before, let's have a boycott, and have no understanding that a Walmart employs, after the federal government, most African American people in this country. So then there's always that like tension, like, don't shop at Walmart. And I'm like, well, you know what? It's going to affect the worker at Walmart. So you can still do that. But also, I truly feel like the United States people don't know how to organize, and that it takes more than one day. It could take years. And then it has to be millions of people, and for folks, we're talking also Cooperation Jackson, calling for a general strike in October so we can do that. So when now you're in Latin America, I feel like all the countries, as many countries, want to go back to a moment, I don't want to say just fascist, but not conservative, but I don't know, dictator a little bit. Like, I was just happening to read about Germany and the ADF, and then realizing France and Germany, I'm like, oh, they're taking it back. Like, they're right wing and it's working in their countries. It might be not working here, although we don't even know the numbers of people that have been picked up as quote undocumented citizens. So when you think about movements you've seen and covered, what would that look like here? What would it require?
I mean, let's look at the United States and then move to Germany just for a minute. You ran for president with Cynthia McKinney. That was very important. You put certain things on the agenda and so on. I think I've always said that it's very important that the Green Party puts candidates up, runs in as many places as possible, keeps building, the infrastructure of an alternative. Very important. But in 2016, Bernie Sanders run, and I mean, Bernie Sanders is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this groundswell of people that were inspired to join that movement and got involved in the primaries and so on. Sanders really picked up the kind of energy that started maybe sometime around the Occupy movement, Black Lives Matter, etc., etc. He picks up that whole energy and he brings it into the Democratic Party in 2016. And I think the assassination of the Sanders campaign in 2016 by the Hillary Clinton group that wouldn't permit Sanders to come in and be a real challenge is responsible fully for Trump. Because what Sanders was bringing to the table with universal health care, even if it's all muddy and fudged and not really universal, we're talking about universal or free community colleges. We're talking about the despair, that the class despair in the country and so on. Sanders put all that on the table. The left wing could have picked that up and could have built a constituency, which it didn't build because the Hillary Clinton people assassinated that entire wing in the Democratic Party, because it couldn't pick up that wing, that group of people distressed who wanted to talk about class politics swing to Trump, because Trump at least says that there's American carnage, that there's your towns are destroyed, you don't have any health care, the factories are closed. I'm going to make America great again. And in fact, even smarter than that was Sanders before that. He didn't say, I'm going to make America great again, but he said, I'm going to create a decent society for us. He could have built that constituency, which would have been there today. I don't believe that all Trump voters are racist, or, I think that's just dumb. That's people who don't understand the nature of how class creates culture. There are working class white, people in the United States that, might pick the golden ring of racism today, but they'll throw it away tomorrow. If you give them a good story about why your lives are so precarious and why you don't have a hospital in driving distance, Trump just comes in and says, blame the immigrants. Yeah. But if you came in and said, no, hey, listen, let's blame the billionaires because this is really where it's at, which Sanders was doing, he could have built a constituency. And I blame the Clintons for really destroying, for not allowing democracy to come to the convention, and allowed Sanders, even after the victory of Trump, to build a constituency, because that Sanders movement after 20C was useless. It wasn't even an NGO, afterwards. This is the same thing the British Labour Party did to Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn was doing a similar thing as Sanders. He was trying to revive social democracy. They killed it off, right across the West, in France, in Germany, in Italy. Any time social democracy or the left tried to build a constituency of people who were precarious workers and so on, they were shut down. In France, in this last parliamentary election, Mélenchon, of the Le France Insoumis, the party of the left, made an alliance with the communists and with the socialists and with the Greens and others, and they got the largest number of seats in the parliament. Mélenchon's bloc should have been invited to form the government, be the prime minister in France, not the president, but run the government. And instead, Emmanuel Macron, the president, chose a right-wing guy despite the mandate of the people, and that kind of stuff, that breaks the ability of people like us to articulate an agenda. Look, I just want to repeat, I'm not a big Sanders guy. I mean, there's a lot of problems with old Bernie. I'm not like a Bernie bro or anything. I really have a lot of problems with this politics. But if Sanders had succeeded in building a movement, it would have helped you and me, because then our conversation, Rosa, would have made sense to people. We'd have had bigger audiences. Sanders would have been, in a sense, the battering ram, opened up space to have a conversation about class and so on. You can't do it now. What are you caught between? You're caught between, on the one side, Trump and that whole flank. And what's the Democratic alternative? Certainly not the left. This is not normal. And hello, actually, newsflash, this is normal.
And also the Democrats, I find them at this point just so exhausting. I'm like, what's the point? I mean, this dude, as he always said, and now having immunity from the Supreme Court, could literally, and is doing anything and everything. And the rapid way that he's doing it's, I get it. He's throwing out everything to see what sticks. He's like, let me deal with the chaos while y'all are, going into people's file. Let's fire this next group of workers. Let's threaten. And what I see in Europe is, I don't want to say a more dangerous, right? But they're electing, or not electing, are there more right-wing movements and groups outside of what we know, Germany and France, like, you know, a little, I know you talked a little bit about India, what's going on in Latin America. Yeah, so not sure the whole question, more about why it is important that people have an international lens first and foremost. And do you think that after he's out, it would have gone so much to the right that the rest of these years may just be a litany of these type of presidents or fascists or well, not dictators yet, authoritative, if people don't do something like right now
Well,
collectively at
first,
that
yeah,
scale.
I mean, I think you're right to point the finger to the world as well, because Trump's former close advisor Steve Bannon works very closely with a group of right-wing political parties, not only in Europe but also Latin America. These are their two fronts. The
Oh,
political party Vox in Spain, which is a right-wing, very popular party, very right-wing party in Spain. Vox created a thing called the Madrid Forum, which includes far right wing parties from Latin America and from some parts of Europe. It's in Vox that you incubate people like Javier Milei and his sister from Argentina, very far right wing libertarian, friend of Elon Musk, president of Argentina. Mr. Bolsonaro of Brazil, far right wing guy, most could very well one of the Bolsonaristas could very well come back as president after Lula's term. This time in El Salvador, Nabil Bukele is so far right wing, but he's captured the sentiment of the people because he just said, forget civil rights, forget human rights. We're just going to go in and smash the drug gangs, throw them all in jail. I don't care if they're guilty or not guilty. It's a policy that Elon Musk went to study. Mr. Trump thinks it's a great policy. It should be adopted. By the way, here, Rosa, we also have a problem on the left because we don't know how to address crime. Generally, there are criminals in the world, and most criminals actually prey on the poor because that's the communities from which they reside and so on. We don't really have a language to talk about what to do about criminality. We go into a kind of middle class liberalism, restorative justice, this, that, and the other. But what happens if you have a drug dealer selling drugs to little kids in a playground? What happens to that guy? You can't go to the community and say, we want restorative justice for this guy. They want him locked up for 20 years. They want him killed, actually. That's what Nabil Bukele appealed to. He went in, sent in armed people, go and capture all the drug dealers, throw them in jail. And there was an appeal for that. People voted him in. I don't think the election was stolen. I think he got huge support for it. And that Bukele effect is having an impact in other parts of Latin America. People are saying, we don't want to tolerate drug dealers. I don't care about civil liberties. I just want them to go and get locked up. Now, I also understand that, hey, listen, guys, the drug dealer isn't a drug dealer. He used to be a young person, no choices in life. You destroyed their schools. You took away all his employment opportunities. He got into this business out of really desperation. You can't target this person. Look at their life. I mean, why not build schools, build, other things? Yeah, okay, let's do that. But what are you going to do today? And that's where the left fails the conversation, because we always go, Rosa, let's
yeah.
rebuild the lives of the people. But hey, Vice President Clemente, what are you going to do today for somebody? Here's my family. I live in a poor neighborhood. Yeah, my kids are going to school. I don't want them harassed on the road. What are you going to do for me today? And part of the right wing's appeal is that they just come out and say, yeah, we're just going to shoot the drug dealers. And people are
Right.
like, yay, go ahead and do that, brother. We're with you, right behind you.
Wait,
And
PJ,
we,
I'm glad you said that just
yeah.
quickly. When people conversations about Trump, what I do always say is there's some truth to some of the things he said, and I think you just made that point clearly, right? Like the left, abolish the police, abolish prisons. Absolutely. What does that look like? What does it look like to hold people accountable? But also, if you're coming, and especially being from Black and brown communities and having so many of my cousins who live in the Bronx or other places, and sometimes we'll be having conversations, and I'll be like, you know what? I get it. Like in the culture of hip hop, we call it on the come up. So like Trump in the 80s was the come up. The fact that he was going to parties with rappers, and the fact that some of what he says at levels can be true. And then the left often dismisses those people as not having politics. They have politics. They're choosing it for that. And why? If that makes sense.
But you're raising a very good point. It's called listening to the class. Take the class. It's what you said earlier, that you can't have a resistance in college campuses. You can't have a resistance on Facebook. You got to go to the class. You got to organize the class. You got to talk to real working class people, precarious workers who have real bloody problems, and they want you to give them real solutions. They don't want you to tell them everything will be solved under socialism. They need solutions now because we are alive now. And that has been one of the difficulties of a left movement, is that we have to do two things at the same time. We have to solve people's problems now in a system that we know can't solve those problems, and we want to change the system. We want to do both things. You can't just tell people, hey, listen, you can't solve this under a capitalist system. We just got to fight for socialism. People don't understand that. You got to do both things. You got to fight as much as you can to win reforms now, at the same time as you're building people's confidence to fight to build a new world. I mean, if we're not dealing with issues such as hunger now, illiteracy now, criminality now, and so on, if we don't have proposals, concrete proposals. Hey, listen, I was all for abolish the police, except it's a dumb slogan. It's a dumb slogan. It doesn't make sense to working class people. What do you mean abolish the police?
Right, right.
They say, I understand fuck the police. I don't understand abolish the police. Because fuck the police is, I don't fucking want them around. I don't trust them. Abolish the police, I don't understand that, because guess what? Somebody breaks into my house at 3 a.m, I'm going to call somebody to help me. And is that the police? Is that my cousin? Is that whoever? Somebody has to help me. Okay, I can't deal with this myself. So abolish the police, dumb slogan. But I got the point. We don't need a occupying police force in a poor community where they just drive in, see a black man, with schizophrenia and just choke him to death. Obviously, you don't want that. Yeah, abolish that police. But that slogan was much better in the 1980s and early 90s. Fuck the police, because what that meant is these guys don't get us. They don't understand us. Yeah, it's not that we don't want a police in abstraction. It's just that these guys don't get us. They don't understand us. They want to kill us. We want something else. When the Black Panthers took up guns and started patrolling the neighborhood, they were the police. What do you think the Black Panthers were? They were the black police in Oakland. They were not saying abolish the police. They were saying, fuck that police. We are the police. In fact, one of the best examples of what the Panthers did was in an intersection in Oakland where there were a number of kids getting hit and run over by cars. The Panthers said, okay, we're going to go and buy a stop sign and we're just going to put it in. We're not going to go to the city council. We're not going to talk to the police. We're just going to put a fucking stop sign up on the intersection. That's what they did. And then they patrolled the intersection. And then the accidents declined to zero because they became the police in their community. That's why they were so popular.
And I think too, a term that might be better would also be like community safety, self-determination, and how you have this accountability. My daughter went to, there's a school here in Albany called the Free School. It started here, but it's in 5 other states. My daughter was there, all my organizers' friends, very kind of Montessori, mixed grades, but anytime there was an issue, or maybe a student did something to another student that was wrong, call them a name, not be nice, they will call for a school meeting. So they would
Mm.
stop everything. They would all get together. The person who caused the harm would say what they did, do anything restorative that they came up together for the person that was harmed. And I'm like, so I'm seeing kids that are 5 to 14 in a setting that built that. And, these kind of things, that's what we have to grow. So when you say, yes, in many of our communities, people are like, no, we need the cops. It's like, no, no, no. And how you just broke it down. But as we're getting to that hour point, Gaza, I mean, Palestine, I has this been, I don't want to say worse than anything we have seen in modern time, but I mean, it's clearly an ethnic cleansing genocide. How do we at least continue to be rightly aware every day of what's happening here and not just don't talk about it anymore?
I mean, the every once in a while you see this as well, of course, and you probably get this every day. Somebody puts something up on social media that says, "Don't stop talking about Palestine." Almost every day it comes as a meme or something or the other. Yeah, I think this is very true. It doesn't matter. We are not powerless. At the very least, you can say something. You can take every opportunity, and I don't mean you go over to your neighbor every day and say, "Hey, don't forget what's happening in Palestine." You don't have to be annoying, but I think just make a tweet every day. What's going on? I mean, they are. This is vicious brutality against the people. They have been given the green light not only by the United States government, and I mean the whole U.S. ruling class, but also the Europeans. Green light to do whatever the hell they want. Netanyahu feels completely empowered to just slaughter, destroy homes, bulldoze. I'm so glad No Other Land won the Oscar. I
Oh,
hate the
yeah.
Oscars. I super hate the Oscars, but I'm so glad that Basil won the Oscar for that. It's an amazing film. If you can get a chance to see it, you got to see it.
Yeah.
When you see the
Everybody go
film,
see. Yeah.
everybody, what's amazing, Rosa, about the film
Yeah.
is that the film was made in 2019. It's about 2019. It
Right.
was made. It was made whatever, 4, 5 years before the genocide. Okay, this
Right.
has been happening for a long, long time, and the Palestinians have been fighting it for a long, long time. One of the important lessons that I keep learning from this struggle and other struggles is nobody is asking you and me to fight their fight for them. They are fighting their fight. They need us to fight alongside them. I've always felt the same with the Black liberation struggle, with national liberation struggles. I don't need to fight anybody's fight for them. I have to fight alongside them. I don't like the term ally. I really don't like the term
I
ally. I
I
don't
know.
want to be your ally. I'm
Be
not
my
your
accomplice
ally.
for justice, but know that I mean, it's also how it's the nonprofit trendy.
Yeah, I'm not your ally. I'm your comrade. I'm going to fight alongside you. I want to take the bullet with you.
Mm,
So I'm fighting along. I'm not claiming to fight for you. I'm fighting alongside you. That's important, I think. That has to be said. I'm your comrade. And that, I think, is how I feel about the Palestinian struggle. I am not fighting for the Palestinians because they are fighting bravely for themselves on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, in every day fighting for themselves. But they need us as comrades to be fighting alongside them. So I agree with that line. Don't stop talking about Palestine. Make your elected officials in the United States embarrassed about what they have defended. I'm so proud of the people from Code Pink. I wore their shirt today, Rosa. I'm
yeah,
so proud of people like Medea Benjamin, Jody Evans. Every day they are on the halls of Congress harassing Congress people, saying, what is your view on Palestine? Why do you, not call it a genocide? This is essential, but you can't just leave it to, a group of people who can do this. Everybody, when your congressperson comes back to Albany and to wherever you live in the United States, if you live in the United States, go to their town halls or wherever they are and ask them, why don't you use the word genocide to describe what's happening in Palestine? It's a simple, straightforward, non-confrontational question. I'm not saying call them a genocide denier. Just say, why aren't you using the word genocide when you talk about what's happening in Gaza? Because that's the term that the International Court of Justice has authorized. Simple question. Let's see what they answer. Make them embarrassed about supporting a genocide. I mean, that really, Rosa, that's what people can do, wherever they live. You can't do a lot, but you can always stand as a comrade and not flinch from being a comrade, even though you get attacked and you might lose your job and so on. You can't flinch from being a comrade.
Yeah, like always have like coping tactics. Do that, then somebody else could do that. And part of that then is about trusting enough in your comrades to say, wait a minute, I can't get there. I know it's going to be good. I'm going to do this. And I hope to see that more. But so one more question internationally. I have read now so much about what's going on in Ukraine. Do you think Ukraine will cede and give Putin what he wants? And then if that happens, what? Because I don't know, because I'm not super well versed in that history, but
I mean, Rosa, this goes back to 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. It's actually incredible that when the Soviet Union collapsed, there weren't more border disputes because all the republics broke apart, right? Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, the Dagestans tried to break away. There was a war. Georgia, Ukraine, the Baltic states, all of them were part of the Soviet Union and they broke off. There was no conflict in the immediate years after 1991. Part of it was Russia was super weak. And it had been weakened. And there was a guy who was basically subordinate to the US. Boris Yeltsin was in charge. As Russia got stronger, it began to look at its borders and wonder, are we secure? I mean, there are Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, Russian-speaking people in Georgia. What about them? Should they be now part of Russia and so on? I mean, what you saw in Georgia in the brief war that they had there in 2008, and then this conflict in Ukraine, which has been going on since 2010, actually. It didn't just start in 2022. It's a very long conflict. It's about things like minority rights for Russians inside Ukraine. It's about whether Ukraine should be allowed to join NATO. It's about the United States conducting a regime change operation in Ukraine in 2014, overthrowing the government, putting a pro-US government in place. Russians found that very threatening. I mean, how would the US like it if the Russians engineered, a pro-Russian government in Mexico? They wouldn't like that. Forget Mexico. Imagine if the Russians got involved in an island nation in the Caribbean. Oh, wait a minute. The Russians were involved in Cuba. And what did the US do? They almost started a nuclear war to prevent the Russians from having influence on Cuba. So this is a very complicated issue. And it's not about like Putin is bad and somebody's good and whatever. These are complicated, difficult issues. Tomorrow, the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, should go out in public and dispute the US control over New Mexico, parts of Texas, Arizona, California, and say all of that is Mexico. You stole it in the wars, in 1840s. And ask for it back, saying this is our territory. What would the US do then? I mean, these are complicated issues. One shouldn't have too narrow a perspective. And I actually think on this, Trump is right, that there should be a ceasefire because Ukraine has to live next to Russia. It can't, you can't lift Ukraine up and relocate it to Iowa. It's going to remain next to Russia. They got to come to an agreement. And so fighting this war, arming the Ukrainians, continuing a war where young people are dying, it's unacceptable. So on this, I agree with Trump. I mean, I don't have a problem agreeing with somebody if I agree with them. I'm not going to disagree with Trump because he's an asshole. I mean, if he says something I agree with that. I don't have a problem. Trump says that, hey, listen, tomorrow's Thursday. Well, it is Thursday. You're right. I mean, just because Trump said it doesn't mean it's wrong. I don't like people like that. They are unable to judge reality based on the facts. They
And
just
it's
judge everything
reactionary.
based on emotion. It's
Yeah, it's
reactionary. They're reactive.
yeah.
Correct. They're reacting to Trump. That's a very wrong approach. Yeah. So yeah, it's a complicated issue, Rosa. It's going to take time to resolve. But I do hope that there's a ceasefire and there's a deal. And you know, I mean, it's a conflict. It's been going on for a long time. Nobody gets everything. You know, Ukraine used to be part of the USSR. In fact, the sections of eastern Ukraine, which are the Russian-speaking population, were not originally part of Ukraine. They were part of Greater Russia. The Soviet Union decided, let's make this part of Ukraine, link up the big steel and iron ore factories with the iron ore and steel mines that exist in the eastern part of Ukraine. But that was part of a Soviet decision. That wasn't some authentic Ukrainian nation that existed since the 12th century. You know, so if you got to break away a part, it goes back to Russia. That's what they should negotiate. It's not a question of, you know, this is Ukraine, it has to be inviolable. In fact, Stalin fought to get Ukraine a seat in the United Nations in 1945. He wanted each of the Soviet republics to have an independent seat in the UN, and his deal with Roosevelt was, no, okay, the USSR gets a seat, Ukraine gets a seat, Ukraine Soviet Socialist Republic, and Belarusia, or now Belarus, gets a seat. These were not independent countries; they were part of the USSR. But Stalin fought with Roosevelt to get Ukraine a seat in the UN, and that's how it has a seat in the UN. Anyway, it's a very long and complicated, fascinating story, but can't be reduced to, you know, I don't like Putin. I don't.
Yeah.
Complicated international relations, not about personality.
Yeah. Well, VJ, if you could give out the website, everybody get as many of VJ's books as you can, because I think people is studying internationalism. Is sometimes the language is heady, but you don't write in that way. You write as an organizer, an activist, and a journalist. So, I mean, I'm going to bring you back, as you know, I think this was probably one of the best shows, just informative. To also allow people to get some breathing room away from the chaos and also understanding, right, that at the end of the day, there's no borders anymore in that way, and that we should be paying attention to how the world is, what the United States does that impacts the world, and not be the Americans. Well, I never would call myself American, but not be those type of Americans. So yeah, I would love for you to give out information so people can follow the work of the organization and you as well.
Yeah, sure. The website is thetricontinental.org. And I know it's owned by Elon Musk, but I'm most active on Twitter. It's the two parts of my name put together. I know it's owned by him, but you know, everything is owned by somebody.
I know
Yeah.
all of it. Like it's there until it's not there.
Yeah, everything is owned by somebody, and you and I don't own much. So we got to piggyback on whatever they give us. You know, we take
True.
what they give us, we do everything we can there till they throw us out.
Yeah. VIJAY PRASHAD, thank you so much for being with us. It's so good to see you, my comrade, my friend. And I'm gonna have to come and see you to get out
That's
of here.
beautiful. And best of luck to your daughter as she flies with her wings into the world. Best of luck to her.
I know.
Take care of yourself.
I always say to people, I wasn't born into the movement, but my daughter was and has been raised like people like you and Kali and all our beautiful movement comrades. Thank you for your time, VIJAY. We'll talk soon.
Take care of yourself.
All right, well.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Okay, everybody. Oh, yeah. Hey, sorry to everybody. All right. I hope you enjoyed this week's Disruptive Chaos. I know yesterday was hard for people who follow this, like so many of you. And thank you for rocking with me tonight. See you soon. Peace, everybody. Take care.